Ciao, I'm Mario, a Swiss car guy on YouTube, and today is another driving around video. I am driving my 2008 Lexus LS600H. And today's video will be a bit of an introspective, because while I was on holiday for the last couple of weeks, I realized something. And in fact, I realized why I like the cars that I like. And it's all because of childhood trauma. Well, maybe not trauma, but it's the discussion of nature versus nurture. And I think in my case, nature has a big role in it, because as a child, I've always liked cars. I don't remember a time when I didn't like cars, but this must have to do with the fact that I really hated walking. And to be honest, I still do to this day, but nowadays I will occasionally take a walk. But as a child, it was utterly bewildering to me why we would walk places when we had a car. Why spend so much time going somewhere when you could just go with a car, be back, and then spend more time at home playing, you know? And the cars we had when I was a child basically explain everything about me. You see, I'm not just Swiss, I'm also Italian, because my parents are Italian immigrants. And that meant that when I was a child, usually our holidays would be spent in Italy with the family. And that meant that we needed a car that we could travel with to Italy 1,250 kilometers in relative comfort and with enough space for, you know, 2 parents and 3 children. And for this reason, we always had a large car, a car we used for traveling. And we would use that car to go to Italy, but also to go visit my grandparents, who at that point were living in Chur, which is about an hour away from where I grew up. So that was our basically travel car, our Sunday car. And we used to have a second car on the same number plates, because this is Switzerland after all, that we use around town for shorter distances. And the car we used for shorter distances, at first, when I was born, we had the Fiat 131, and then we had the Fiat Panda, the original Fiat Panda, the classic by Giugiaro. And man, that was a really crappy car. I mean, it had no power, it had nothing in it, and having this, you know, the smaller car to, you know, save your big car for the longer travel or for special occasions is something that to this day I don't get. Because I like having a nice car and I like driving a nice car, and I find it really strange having a nice car and then driving a crap car instead. So this is something that clearly formed me, and this is why I basically never really drive beaters. I mean, you could argue that my Lexus is kind of a beater, because I mean it has 209,000 kilometers, but I don't really like driving, you know, cheap and nasty cars just so I can save up my good car and I don't make too many kilometers on it. It's just, it doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me as a child, and it certainly doesn't make sense to me now as an adult. Therefore, I try to drive my good cars as often as I can. But now you might wonder, what was the good car we tried to save by driving a Panda around the town? Well, it was an Audi. To be exact, an Audi 100 of the C3/Type 44 generation. And I don't actually know too much about that car, because I don't know the exact specs. I don't even know the exact year. But I reckon it might have been an 83 maybe, 1983 car that my dad bought in the mid-80s. Apparently he got a very good deal on the car. My mom still tells about that. But I mean, that car, it was big. And it's certainly one of the reasons why nowadays I have a penchant for these big cars. The problem with that car was that it was a stripper, meaning it had absolutely nothing in it. Literally nothing. The car had more blank buttons than a blank button factory. Instead of a rev counter, it had a big clock, and it was a manual, therefore a rev counter would have been useful. The C3 Audi 100, when it came out, it was heralded as being very aerodynamic, because it was kind of rounded off, and it had quite a large window surface on the car. The problem is, with a large window surface and no air conditioning, the car gets really warm. And we used that car to drive to Italy in the height of summer. So our travels to Italy were basically torture in that car because it became incredibly warm. I think nowadays probably children would be taken away from parents who let them endure stuff like that. But my memories of that car were of heat, heat, heat. And it was truly, truly gruesome. And to this day, I don't realize why my parents didn't just buy a car with air conditioning. I mean, sure, in the late 80s, early 90s, it wasn't as common as it is now, but it did exist. So they could have been nice to us. I remember distinctly when sometime in the early 90s, I was still a relatively young child, we stopped at a gas station and the car next to us was an Audi V8. So kind of a similar car, but the exact opposite, because while our car had nothing, it was an absolute stripper, didn't have any extras whatsoever, the Audi V8 had everything. So I glanced into the car and I was astounded that, you know, cars this luxurious were available. And from that comes a deep, deep aversion of stripper models. This is why I always like these luxury cars, because they have everything, they have every option, and I don't ever want to be without that. This is why I go for these cars, and in fact I would rather buy a smaller car with better options than a larger car that's a stripper. Because okay, frankly, I don't need the space, but I like a well-specced, well-optioned out car. And the reason is obviously because in my childhood I was treated to the cars that had absolutely nothing. I mean, the Audi was terrible, the Panda was terrible, and this is why maybe nowadays I overcompensate. Then of course there's the other thing about either the Panda or the Audi. Both cars were absolutely anemic. The Panda must have had around 40 horsepower, and the Audi, I don't know which engine it had, but my mom always sort of told me, oh, it's an Audi 100, it has 100 horsepower, and that's likely if it was a 1.9 5-cylinder. And yes, it was a 5-cylinder, so it sounded great, and this is also the reason why some years later we bought a Fiat Bravo HGT, because it had a 5-cylinder, which sounds nice. But at least the Bravo had 155 horsepower, the Audi had about 100. And that car was quite anemic, because 100 horsepower for a fairly large car, even though cars back then were a bit lighter than now, isn't a lot. And so I remember that with that car, overtaking was a bit of a problem. At that time, obviously, I wasn't old enough to drive, but I remember having my sister at the wheel or my mom, and basically meaning that yes, you can overtake on the motorway, but in a single lane road, yeah, don't bother, because the car really doesn't have enough power. And this leads me to always buy these high-powered cars, because also it's something that I didn't have when I was a child. We never had a nice high-power car. We always had these low-powered, you know, anemic, slow cars. And for somebody who likes cars, that's terrible. So nowadays, another thing where I obviously overcompensate, because I don't really need 445 horsepower like right now to drive through Zurich. But then again, I'd rather have them than not. Another thing that the Audi is obviously responsible for is that I'm not a big fan of German cars, because that Audi wasn't a great car. I mean, besides the fact it didn't have any special equipment and stuff like that, that car wasn't actually very well built, because I remember it had crank windows all around, but on the rear doors the cranks had fallen out, the handles, and at some point I believe we lost one, so we only had the one handle for the two doors. It wasn't well built. I mean, the door cards were falling apart, and that was not such an old car. Sure, when we finally traded it in, the car was about, I reckon, 12 years old, but it was falling apart. And I mean, my Lexus is now 13 years old and it's not falling apart. Of course, it's about 25 years newer and it's a Lexus, but that kind of made me kind of wary of German cars, and I think their reputation is unfounded. And that Audi, let me tell you something, on a nice and sunny day when it was like 50 degrees inside, it would smell like a glue factory. Really, you could get high riding in that car, or me, I remember I used to get headaches because there were so many exhalations coming from the different plastics. And I know that for a fact, after that car came out, Audi introduced a smell team who worked specifically to get rid of weird car smells and exhalations from the materials. So nowadays their cars probably smell alright, but back then that car was like driving around in a glue factory. It was terrible. So nowadays I'm not a big fan of German cars, and certainly not a big fan of Audi. Even though everybody seems to like them, I'm personally not that much of a fan. Even though the car we replaced the Audi with, it was a Lancia Thema. I mean, that was a terrible car as well, but at least that car had a bit of power, it had air conditioning, it had a few features. That was a nice car. Even though that car, it didn't really last long, because I think we traded it in 2002 when the car was 9 years old. And by that time it was basically done. It was finished. It was beyond economical repair. So not the best car choices in our family. But to be honest, the Fiat Bravo HGT that my mom got after that has been a pretty good and reliable car. Until we sold it for $500 because because changing the cam belt on that car costs like $2,000, and the car at that time wasn't worth that much. And then she bought the very nice eggplant. So this is it. I became the car guy I am today because of the terrible cars we used to own when I was a child. What about you? Do you know what made you the car guy you are now? Can you trace it back to one singular car that shaped you in the way you are now? Please comment down below. As always, I like interacting with you in the comments. Also, since I am doing this Instagram thing, follow me on Instagram. I also have Twitter, but I don't really do Twitter that much, and social media is too much work, to be honest. Anyway, follow me if you want to see very, very nice posts of the cars that I encounter on my travels through Zurich. Yeah, but that's basically it. So thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like. Consider subscribing to my channel if you like my rants and my blabbing videos. But I'd say this is it. I want to stop it before I get to the tunnels. So thank you very much for watching and have a nice day.